The men laughed hardest when they saw her carrying a shovel, not for the garden or the root cellar, but to dig her outhouse downward, not outward. "You'll flood yourself come thaw," Clyde Haskins had grunted with a spit into the dirt, leaning against his fence post as if propped up by his own smugness. "Ain't no woman supposed to be building her own privy anyhow, especially not some tunnel rat of a thing below ground. What you think this is, a mine shaft?" He wasn't the only one. 3 other men had paused their wagon loads to watch her that morning. She hadn't asked them to stop, but they stopped anyway, like they did any time she dared act like she didn't need a man to check her measurements, swing her pick, or cut her pine beams. But she kept digging. That was back in September, such when the sun still warmed the North Ridge and the last of the yellow jackets buzzed lazily around anything sweet, when firewood was still more bark than ash, and every settler had another full month to prepare for the freeze, though most figured they'd been through worse and didn't need much fixing. Except May Cullen. May knew better. She had already buried one husband to frostbite, not to war, not to some duel or stampede or robbery, but to plain, cruel cold, the kind of freeze that crept into your joints before it stiffened your fingers and took your breath, the kind that made you dread the walk to the outhouse because the wind found places even your coat didn't know existed, the kind that turned a chamber pot into a death sentence if you waited too long in the night. Her husband, Thad, hadn't waited. He'd tried to make it out behind the house after their chimney cracked mid-January last year. He never made it back. They'd found him frozen against the doorframe, one boot still halfway off, pants clutched in one hand, like he thought he could beat the wind to it. So no, May wasn't going to risk it. Not for herself, and not for her daughter. She was already too old for childbirth when Clara was born, just weeks before Thad died, 41 and wrapped in pain and silence the whole birth. But when Clara came out screaming like she knew what kind of world she'd been pushed into, May had decided then and there that the girl wouldn't suffer the same mistakes. So May built her underground. While the other women were adding curtains or trying to bake bread that didn't come out like bricks, May dug. Every morning after feeding the chickens and boiling the diapers clean, she vanished into that trench behind her cabin, digging a sloped tunnel straight down into the earth behind her home, angled so no runoff would pool, reinforced with cut pine boards she salvaged from the sawmill's discard pile, and lined with thick rock to keep it from collapsing once the ground froze hard. She worked quiet, kept her eyes down, let the gossip float past her ears like snowflakes on wind. She lost her mind when she lost Thad. She's gonna bury that baby with building a death trap like that? What kind of woman thinks of toilets in September? But May kept working. She didn't just dig a hole, she built a room. Not big, just tall enough to crouch in, just wide enough for a bench and a chamber bucket. She ran a vent pipe to keep the stink down. Packed sawdust in crates, and even chiseled a small shelf into the wall to keep dry cloths, rags, and matches, a place where you could strike a light, warm your hands against the stone, and use the bathroom without facing death by wind. Her neighbors called it madness, but May called it prepared. Come November, the snow came fast. Before most had finished chinking their walls or patching their roof leaks, temperatures dropped to single digits, and still, no one had finished their new outhouses. Most just used their old ones, sitting crooked over frozen holes in the ground with doors that no longer shut right. The men grumbled but bore it. The women did worse. They dreaded the nights when their babies cried and they had to go out themselves, or worse, when the baby had to go. One woman, Helen Dupree, wrapped her daughter in a wool shawl and sprinted out at dusk. The girl's fingers came back blue. She didn't speak for 2 days. May heard about it through the gossip chain that finally trickled to her. She didn't say much, just nodded, fed her chickens, and boiled Clara's clothes dry like she did every morning. Then the freeze deepened. By December, the storm came down from the mountains. Not a snowfall, a freeze. No flurries, no gentle build, just ice, black ice. White frost, crackling on every surface, turning cabin roofs into solid slabs, making nails push loose from their beams, and frozen door latches snap under pressure. It hit hard. The winds came with it, and they came howling. One by one, the outhouses became impossible. The doors froze shut, then the hinges cracked. The seats turned to ice. Boards split. Buckets toppled in the wind. Some tried using chamber pots indoors, but with too many people and not enough cleaning cloth, sickness brewed in more than one home. Then came the freeze injuries. Lloyd Maris tried to relieve himself at midnight and slipped in the snow, broke his arm and passed out before he made it back. 2 of his toes blackened before his wife dragged him in. Old Ellie Harmon's grandson, barely 8, peed his pants out of fear when the wind slammed the outhouse door shut behind him. The ammonia burn blistered his thighs. Meanwhile, May lit her lantern, opened the hatch to the slope behind her cabin, and stepped into quiet, rock-lined warmth. It wasn't toasty, no, but it wasn't deadly. She'd packed a few wool scraps on the stone bench, kept the matches dry, replaced the sawdust after every use. Clara, now almost walking, never saw snow. She barely knew what it was. She spent most of that winter barefoot, wrapped in quilts her mama stitched from ruined flour sacks. It wasn't until the second storm rolled in, worse than the first, shutting down even the trails between cabins, that someone finally knocked on May's door. It was Marcy Whitlow, hunched and shivering, child clutched under her coat. "I heard you have a place to go," she said, not meeting May's eyes. "For private needs," May nodded, stepped aside. Marcy whispered, "Ours is froze to the ground. I haven't gone in 3 days. The baby either." May gestured toward the back hatch without a word. Within a week, 6 other neighbors came. They didn't laugh anymore, didn't mock, didn't offer apologies either, just knocked quiet, hats in hand, red-faced with cold and shame. May never turned anyone away. By the time January was over, every house in the settlement, save May's, had a sick child or an injured elder. 3 cabins reported infections from spoiled indoor waste. The town doctor, already stretched thin, told folks plain, "That widow's bathroom probably saved a life or two, and that was before the blizzard hit. Because then, when the trail markers vanished in the whiteout, and even the snowshoes couldn't stay on top of the drifts, when you had to crawl just to get to your door without getting knocked over by the wind, that was when everyone realized just how smart May Cullen had been, because by then, her bathroom wasn't just convenient, it was the only one left, and they still hadn't seen what else she'd built underground. When the whiteout finally swallowed the valley, there wasn't a soul left laughing. It started on a Wednesday, just after the noon bell rang from the chapel tower. Though no one heard it over the wind, the storm rolled in thick, stacking the drifts in strange, sharp ledges, like someone had laid knives in the snow. What began as a fast wind became something else entirely. Visibility vanished. You could no longer see your own boots. Snow didn't fall. It pressed sideways and fast, 1,000 cold needles hammering your skin even through thick wool. May Cullen stood inside her one-room cabin, Clara in her arms, and listened. It was different this time, not the same as last month's freeze. This wasn't something you endured with more firewood or a better scarf. This was the sort of cold you hid from. This was the kind that got into your lungs and filled them with something heavy. People died in storms like these without anyone ever finding them until thaw. She stepped to the rear hatch and opened it cautiously. The wind sucked at it like a hungry mouth, but the slope downward shielded the worst of it. She stepped carefully, Clara bundled on her hip, lantern in hand, and descended into the corridor she'd built. The underground bathroom didn't look like much, just a dark, dug-out room, maybe 5 feet wide by 6 feet long, ceiling just tall enough for her to stand bent. But inside, it was dry, safe. She'd packed the walls with clay and straw, lined the dirt with slate chunks she'd pulled from the creek beds last spring, and laid a thick pine door over the entrance like a storm hatch. The temperature inside always stayed above freezing, even without a fire. The earth held heat, slowly bleeding it out like a memory of sun. May set Clara down on the wool-lined bench and struck a match. The lantern caught. She checked the shelf. Clean cloths, dry sawdust, soap she'd made with lye, and rendered fat. It wasn't much, but in that moment it felt like a sanctuary. A strange word maybe for a bathroom, but that was what it had become, a refuge. She hadn't planned on sharing it, not because she was selfish. May didn't carry that bone in her body, but because she hadn't believed anyone would need it. Surely others had prepared, she'd thought. Surely, even if they hadn't built underground, they had enough sense to make indoor pots work, or line their walls better, or build storm covers for their outhouses. She'd been wrong. The next knock came 2 hours into the storm. It was Carl Brewer, mid-50s, a father of 4, beard thick with ice, dragging a teenage boy behind him. His son limped, 1 foot bare, the other bound with rags soaked through. "He fell through the outhouse floor," Carl said, without waiting for pleasantries. "The whole thing split in half. Damn ground turned brittle. My other boy, he's sick. Couldn't hold it in, passed out from fever. We've been using a pail inside, but it's starting to stink. And now this one," he didn't finish, just looked at May with that same pride-heavy pleading every man seemed to carry the moment his tools failed him. May said nothing, just gestured for them to come inside. By nightfall, the storm had erased every trail between cabins, all markers buried. Even trees vanished into the wind. Anyone without rope guides or flags tied to their doors had to crawl or feel their way by memory. Still, the knocks came. May started keeping the lantern lit at all hours, and a second one in the bathroom tunnel. She built a line of wool scraps along the inside wall so people could hold to it when they came. When it became clear that people couldn't find the entrance in the storm, she dug out a second tunnel from the bathroom toward the edge of the trees, a side entrance so folks could crawl in even when the wind flattened them. That entrance saved the lives of 3 children. Martha Gibbons had sent her eldest to find relief behind their cabin. The girl was 9. When she didn't return in 5 minutes, the mother went after her. She found the girl buried in snow, unconscious beside the collapsed outhouse, her boots full of frozen urine. She couldn't lift her back inside. They dragged her to May's tunnel. By the time they got there, and the girl's face was blue, and her fingers had stopped moving. But the warmth of the underground chamber, the dry wool, the slow lighting of the lamp, it brought her back. She didn't lose a single finger. By the third day of storm, May's tunnel saw more traffic than the general store had the entire month prior. Word spread that her bathroom was usable, that it still worked, that it weren't freezing. The town's elders, those who hadn't mocked her to begin with, came more cautiously. Silas Ward, the sheriff, arrived with a grimace, but not a single word of mockery. He took his turn inside, came out quiet, nodded at May, and then spent 2 hours helping dig out a path between her main hatch and the cabin's side door. "You saved that girl," he muttered. May didn't reply, just passed him a warm rag for his face. He tied it under his scarf like it was holy. Soon enough, it stopped being funny. May's name wasn't mentioned with a laugh anymore, just a look, a quiet look between men who'd once leaned against their posts and talked about how a woman's place ain't in the ground, like it was God's law. And still the storm didn't stop. For 5 days it raged. Outhouses froze solid, doors snapped off, chamber pots overflowed, buckets cracked, illness spread, norovirus or something like it. 2 infants took fevers. An old woman lost vision in one eye after a fall outside. But not a single injury happened near May's tunnel, and not a single infection came from her latrine, because she kept it clean. She wiped the bench after each use. She swapped sawdust every morning. She boiled the rags in her iron pot. She kept a stick of soap at the entrance and taught every visitor how to wash properly, even if they only had snowmelt. People started calling her Doc May, half in jest, but not really, because it wasn't just a bathroom anymore. It was a lifeline. One morning the preacher showed up. Reverend Wilkes had once said from the pulpit, without naming names, that man was made to labor above the ground, and woman to follow in his warmth. Everyone had known he was talking about May. Now he stood outside her door, shaking so hard his book of Psalms slipped from his coat. He didn't ask, just looked at her, jaw clenched, eyes red. She let him in. He came out 40 minutes later, and instead of leaving, he sat on her porch, silent, blowing on his fingers and mumbling prayers to himself. When May brought him a cup of boiled chicory root, only he bowed his head to it like it was wine. By the 7th day, when the wind finally stopped, and the drift settled into hill-sized lumps across the valley, May's underground bathroom had become a legend, not because of how it was built, but because it worked. Because when every other settler faced rot, disease, injury, or worse, the widow who'd once been mocked for digging a tunnel toilet was the only one who had planned far enough ahead to protect her family. And everyone else's too. The men didn't speak much anymore. The women did. They came by quietly, while their husbands chopped wood or buried dead chickens or shoveled paths from door to barn. They came carrying bundles, flour, dried apples, thick cloth. They left them on May's porch without knocking. One woman, Sally Jane, who'd once called May stone-hearted, came up crying. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I said a lot of things. I didn't know you were building for all of us." May shook her head. "I wasn't," and that was the truth. She'd built it for her daughter. But now, as she watched Clara toddle barefoot across the quilt-lined floor, giggling at the firelight, cheeks warm, belly full, never once knowing the sting of a frozen wind, May realized she'd built it for more than just survival. She'd built it to change things, and people were starting to notice. By the 2nd week after the storm, the valley had changed. Not melted, not thawed. No one was foolish enough to hope for that yet. The drift still rose above windowsills, and the sun still shone dull and weak through a sky the color of old tin. But the cold had passed its peak, and people had started to come outside again, tentatively, clumsily, seemed blinking like moles after too long in their holes. The town had lost 3 elders and 1 baby during the worst of it. No one pretended otherwise. The church bell tolled 4 slow times the next Sunday, each ring sharper than the last, each one reminding every man, woman, and child of what winter had done and what it nearly finished. But most folks also remembered something else. They remembered that during the freeze, when every cabin's outhouse had split or snapped or buried itself beneath 8 feet of white, there had been one place in the entire valley where people could relieve themselves without risking frostbite or worse: May Cullen's tunnel. Now they called it that with a mix of reverence and discomfort, like it was some holy place too dirty to speak plainly of. They didn't use the word bathroom anymore, or privy. They called it the tunnel, and everyone knew what that meant. May never corrected them. She kept doing what she'd always done: hauling water, boiling cloth, feeding chickens, tending Clara. But people noticed something different in her posture now. Not arrogance, not pride, just a kind of quiet endurance that no longer looked strange. The same neighbors who once muttered about her being hard now seemed to understand that her hardness was why she'd survived. Why others had too. She hadn't asked to be a leader, but they followed her now. They followed her because she'd been right. They followed because their children still had their toes, because their wives didn't freeze on midnight trips behind the house, because she'd thought ahead when everyone else had laughed. And then something remarkable happened. And they started asking her what else she knew. One morning, while May was boiling water outside, carefully monitoring the smoke to avoid suffocating the baby, Silas Ward returned. He didn't knock this time. He stood by the post she used for drying diapers, his hat twisting nervously in his hands. "I was thinking," he said after a long silence, "maybe we could talk about, making another one." "Another what?" May asked without looking up. "Tunnel," he said. "Latrine, whatever you call it." She didn't answer immediately. "You've got 10 strong men," she finally said, voice low. "Plenty of hands, more tools than I had, and a full month before the next freeze. Why not build your own?" He swallowed. "We'd like your help, or your plans." May looked at him then, not unkindly, just directly. "You want to follow a plan you once called foolish?" He didn't flinch. "I want to keep my girls alive." And that was how it began. They didn't organize a meeting. That wasn't how these people worked. But word spread, quietly. A few men came, then a few more. One woman, then two. By the third day, a dozen settlers stood outside May's cabin with questions on their breath and pencils behind their ears. "How deep did you dig? What did you pack the walls with? Where'd you get rock this flat? Can a chimney run to it? For warmth? Is sawdust better than ash?" May didn't lecture. She showed. She led them down the tunnel, one at a time, showed them the slope, the clay-packed corners, the vent pipes she'd drilled through rock and snow. She handed out sketches she'd made on the backs of dried cornmeal bags, diagrams of where to dig, what angles to keep, how to reinforce ceilings without needing full timber. She didn't charge them, didn't barter, didn't ask for favors in return. Some offered chickens, some offered split wood, some offered help with Clara, or washing or fence mending. She took what made sense and politely refused what didn't. The town changed again. All across the valley, people started digging. Not outhouses, tunnels, not privies, underground rooms. They copied May's angle, her support beams, her vent pipe. Some made theirs wider. Others added lantern hooks, shelves, stone seats. The Cullen design, as it came to be known, became the standard. And for the first time in the settlement's short history, the men followed a woman's lead, not because they were shamed into it, but because it worked. Because her baby had survived barefoot in a storm that killed grown men, because her hands never shook when the wind blew, because she'd done what none of them had thought to do. It might have ended there, but the thaw brought new dangers. When the ice began to melt, every shallow dug outhouse that had frozen solid for weeks began to leak. Slowly at first, cracks along the ground, seepage in low places, but then faster, more insidious. Pit latrines that had held human waste for months suddenly filled with runoff. Some flooded into wells, others collapsed entirely. It was the second sickness that scared them more than the cold ever had. Children who'd survived frostbite took ill with gut rot. Infants who'd stayed warm now vomited blood. The town's small clinic overflowed with coughs, fevers, diarrhea. One doctor couldn't keep up. That's when Reverend Wilkes came again, this time not alone. He brought the doctor, the sheriff, and 3 settlers with him. "We'd like to make yours permanent," he said. May furrowed her brow. "It's already permanent." "For the town," Wilkes clarified. "A public model, sanitation, a shared space we can build into the center hill, for folks who don't have the strength to dig their own. For the sick, the widows, the crippled." May said nothing. "We want to call it the Cullen Chamber," he added quietly. She laughed at that. "Just build it right," she said. "I don't care what name you give it." And so they did. They broke ground a week later, right in the low rise where the town's meeting house used to stand before termites took it. May drew the plans. Others gathered rock. 2 boys offered to run vent pipes scavenged from the old railway bridge. Women stitched curtains, cleaned old lanterns, wove rugs for warmth. By spring, the new chamber stood finished, 12 feet underground, vented properly, sloped to drain, packed tight with earth and lined with stones set by hand. 3 benches, 2 water buckets. One shared goal: never lose another child to cold. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't pretty. It didn't need to be. The day they opened it, no one held a celebration. No ribbon, no speeches, just a queue of mothers holding babies. And May, sitting on her porch, rocking Clara slow in the dusk light, a cup of boiled chicory at her side, listening to the wind whistle not with hunger, but with peace. The men no longer looked at her the same. Neither did the women. Some called her the Stone Widow. Some called her the Tunnel Mother, but most just called her May. And now, When a child asked where to go during a storm, the answer was easy. Follow the rope line. Head to the Cullen tunnel. May built it before the first big freeze. You'll be warm there. They didn't even have to knock anymore. The latch was always open. By midsummer, it wasn't just her neighbors building underground. Word had spread past the valley. A wagon team from Clear River came through, its driver stopping by May's porch with a can of kerosene and a half-dozen questions scrawled in a notebook. He said their town had heard about her design, said 3 families were already planning to try it come autumn. It's the safest way we've heard, he said, squinting at her with a kind of studied respect. Outhouses up our way rot faster than we can fix 'em. You wouldn't believe what froze last winter. May said nothing, just took the kerosene and nodded. A trade, she figured, one worth making. But inside, she wondered what Thad would have thought of all this. Her late husband had been no fool. He was clever with his hands, gentle with her, proud but not cruel. But he hadn't thought ahead the way she had. He hadn't believed a January trip to the back door could kill a man, hadn't known frost could snap a rib the way it had when he collapsed, hadn't imagined a world where digging a hole, a toilet of all things, could decide whether a child lived or died. She had learned what he never did, and it haunted her. That summer she carved out a second chamber, not because she needed one. Her first tunnel still worked fine, but because she didn't trust the next winter to be kind just because the last had been cruel. And because Clara was walking now, curious, strong. May wanted her to grow into a world that didn't wait for men's permission to be prepared. She dug the second chamber deeper, 10 feet down, then back under the slope toward the old creek bed where the ground stayed dry. This one was wider, reinforced not with scrap beams but real hand-cut timber she traded her last sacks of cornmeal to buy. She installed 2 seats, a gravel-packed floor for drainage, and a real door that latched with iron. No curtain, no board, a door. Not one settler mocked her this time. In fact, several came by to watch, hats in hand, their boys beside them. They asked questions, helped lift beams, even brought her bread or boiled eggs. She accepted the bread, refused the eggs. By late August, the whole town had latrines like hers, or some approximation of them. The Cullen Tunnel, as they still called it, became the template. And not just for waste. Some families began digging for other reasons. Storm shelters, root cellars, storage rooms for grain, apples, salted meat. One man built a sleeping chamber below his floor. It's the only place that holds heat, he told May. Figure I'd rather dream down there than freeze up here. Another woman, Gertie Lang, converted her husband's failed well into a cold pantry. Never thought I'd thank a toilet design for saving my potatoes, she said with a laugh. May didn't laugh with her. She rarely did. But she nodded, slow and solemn, and said, there's no such thing as just a toilet anymore. That fall, Clara fell sick. It started small, just a cough, then a fever. May kept her inside, kept the fire going, fed her boiled herbs and thin porridge. But the girl didn't bounce back like she used to. One morning, May woke to find her limp and quiet, her eyes fluttering but unfocused. May didn't panic. She moved. She wrapped Clara in every scrap of wool she owned, packed a satchel with dry cloth and fire-starting sticks, and carried the girl into the new chamber she'd dug. Not the original tunnel, the second one, the deeper, stronger, drier one. She lit both lanterns, sealed the hatch, closed the iron door. Inside, it was quiet. It smelled of rock, of dry earth, and wood smoke, and pine. She tucked Clara into the bench and built a slow flame using an oil rag and cracked twig. The heat stayed. The air stayed calm. For the first time in 3 days, Clara's breathing steadied. May didn't leave that chamber for 2 days. She fed her daughter mash from a tin cup, dropped drops of fever root on her tongue, wiped her with rags dipped in boiled snowmelt. On the 3rd day, Clara spoke. Bird, she said faintly, pointing toward a crack in the ceiling where a trickle of light poured down. May looked up and smiled, not because she saw the bird, but because Clara had noticed anything at all. When they emerged from that chamber, Clara's fever was gone. May looked thinner, older, but her hands were steady. Neighbors noticed. They'd watched her descend into the ground with a sick child, watched her vanish for 2 days into a rock-lined chamber, while other children in the town fell ill and lay moaning beside fires that barely burned. And when she came back, Clara walked out. That's when folks started calling her more than the widow. They called her the one who plans. It wasn't flattery, it was reverence. One man, Eli Kemp, who'd once thrown a rock at her chicken coop when drunk, came to her that night with a question no man had ever asked her before. Could you draw a map? May squinted at him. A map of what? Of what comes next, he said. For winter, for water, For food, for what we ain't thinking of yet. She didn't say yes, but she stayed up that night with her pencil and scrap paper, drawing circles for root cellars, squares for chambers, tunnels for airflow, vents for smoke, angles for sunlight, shelves for herbs, fireproof stones for stove bases. She drew all the things no one else had ever taught her. By morning, it was 6 full pages. She gave them to Eli without a word. 2 weeks later, Ike, that same man, stood in front of a town gathering and announced, "I say May Cullen's plans are the best thing this town's got." They didn't vote. They didn't need to. By November, the town's first full underground station was completed, a multi-chamber build dug into the northern ridge, with a bath space, a dry toilet room, and a chamber for heating water, all modeled after May's original tunnel, the Cullen plan, printed and copied and handed from settler to settler. It was no longer about bathrooms. It was about survival. That winter, no one died. The old woman with the bad hip made it through. The toddler who'd once frozen his fingers played barefoot near his family's new stove. Even the preacher blessed the underground rooms now, offering prayers before every dig. May stayed quiet. She watched Clara grow. She watched the wind howl without fear, and every time someone asked where it all began, someone else pointed to the slope behind May Cullen's cabin. "That tunnel right there," they'd say. "She dug it before any of us even thought to." They laughed at her for it, said it was foolish, said it was crazy, and then they'd pause. But when winter came, it was the only place still working. The second winter came like an ambush, early, sudden, no warning freeze, no slow build of frost-laced mornings, just one day of clear sky and brown grass. Then the next, a sheet of white descending like a curtain across the mountains. Before the ground could harden under their boots, it was gone, buried under 6 inches of powder that packed into ice within a day, the kind of snow that cracked yoke wood and splintered porch steps. The kind that made men forget how to swing axes straight because the numb in their fingers set in too fast. But that year it didn't bring panic, because this time the valley was ready. No one scrambled to find rope guides. No one scrambled for firewood. No woman risked frostbite dragging a child into a frozen shack. Because beneath the ground, the tunnel stood, dark, dry, and usable. And all of it, every design, every blueprint, every braced beam and properly vented slope, traced back to May Cullen. Now they didn't call it her tunnel. They called it the standard. By then there were 17 Cullen-style tunnels in the valley, 12 built by men, 5 built by women, and 1 large community chamber dug directly into the hill behind the chapel, lit by lanterns and stocked with rags, sawdust, and soap year-round. May had helped design that one too, though she never put her name on it. She didn't need to, because now when people spoke of Cullen's method, they weren't just talking about latrines. They were talking about a mindset, a way of thinking that didn't wait for disaster to strike, that didn't trust old ways just because they were old, a way of thinking that asked, every fall, where will the heat go? Where will the wind blow? Where will I go when the world turns cold? It was a way of living that May had carved into the earth, one shovel at a time. And that winter, when the worst blizzard in 30 years tore down from the ridge, 2 weeks long, high winds, no sun, snow so deep it collapsed 4 cabins. No one died. Not a child, not an elder, not even the livestock froze. Because now the smarter ranchers had borrowed May's ideas to build underground straw rooms for their animals. Not fancy, just deep enough and warm enough to outlast the freeze, just like she had done. People started visiting from other towns. A merchant from Silver Run brought bolts of canvas in exchange for a walk through her tunnel. A doctor from Dyersville spent the night sketching airflow vents and measuring rock insulation. May didn't charge them. She let them see. When asked why she didn't sell the plan, she simply said, "You can't own what you had to learn by burying your husband." It wasn't humility, it was memory. And even now, 3 years after Thad had frozen at her back door, she still kept his coat hung on the wall by the stove, not because she hadn't moved on, but because she had, and she needed to remember why. The third winter came and went, then the fourth, each one with storms, some harder, some lighter, but the town never lost another life to cold or filth again. The Cullen method was now a printed document, 23 pages, copied by hand in ink and pinned to the walls of every church, town hall, and post office from the valley to the county line. A diagram on the front showed a slope descending into earth, a vent pipe rising out like a chimney, a mother's silhouette holding a child by the lantern light. No name at the bottom, no author credit, but everyone knew. May never stopped building. She dug a storage room beside the second chamber, used it to cure meat and hang herbs, dug a smaller tunnel beneath the coop for warm egg laying, built a hand pump that drew groundwater through a pipe that ran into the bathroom slope, clean water, flowing beneath earth, never freezing. By the 5th year, some people said May's cabin wasn't a cabin anymore. "It's a hill with a roof on it," they'd chuckle. A tree house turned inside out, but no one said it with mockery anymore. One woman, new to town, widowed on the trail, came to May one spring afternoon, holding her daughter's hand. She asked no favors, brought no food, gave no speech, just said, "Will you teach me how to start?" May led her to the back slope, handed her the shovel. "Start digging where the snow never lingers." And they began. They dug slow. The earth was softer now, thawed by April sun, dark with memory. The girl laughed when she hit a stone, and May showed her how to roll it away with leverage instead of brute force. That night May sat beside Clara, now almost 6, bright-eyed and wiry, fearless as her mother. The girl laid her head in May's lap and asked, "Why did you build the tunnel?" May looked at the fire. She didn't say, "Because they laughed," didn't say, "Because your daddy froze," didn't say, "Because I was alone." She said simply, "Because I didn't want anyone to die scared and cold." Clara blinked, thought about it, then nodded, as if that was reason enough for anyone to dig a tunnel into stone. The next spring, someone painted a sign above the community latrine, just 4 words, prepared by Cullen's hands. The words weren't fancy, the sign was plain wood, but no one tore it down. And when strangers passed through town and asked about the story, folks would point to May's slope and say, "They mocked her at first, for digging under instead of building up, for thinking with the seasons, for choosing safety over pride. But then winter came, and hers was the only bathroom still standing, the only one still warm, the only one still safe. She didn't just dig a hole, she saved a town." And then they'd nod toward the slope with a kind of quiet awe. "Go on," they'd say, "take a look. You won't find a finer piece of thinking in 100 miles. May never stepped into those conversations, never interrupted. She just kept building, because the wind still blew, and you could never know which winter would be the one that took everything away. But you could dig deep, and you could plan, and sometimes that was enough to save more than just yourself. It was enough to save everyone.